Thank you, LinkedIn. Hello, LinkedIn. All right. Oh dear. I see that this post has a very can I edit this? Copy link to this post, edit post. Can I do that? And then there we go. That's better. Okay, we've got a more compelling title now. That's important. I made a mistake here. I'm learning this process of running lives on LinkedIn. It's a little more involved than I expected. So we're moving through that. We're getting through that. So today, this is part two of our series on ontological leadership. If you are not clear on what ontological leadership means, or like really that what what is transformational leadership, I would definitely recommend you go and watch the first in this series where I describe that in great detail. But I'm going to give the example that I'll give really quickly at the start of each of these, and then we'll talk about what you're going to get from today. Actually, first I'm going to talk about what you're going to get from today. We won't bury that lead. Then I'll provide a quick primer, like very, very quick, of a reminder of what ontological leadership is, transformational ontological leadership, how it works, and then we're going to dive into today's subject. So today, what we're going to be looking at is how you arrived at this point in life and ultimately how you ended up the way you did. More aptly, we could say this, how you ended up being the way you be in the world. And as humans, we don't really have a context for this. What we have a context for is the way I am. So, someone might ask you, like, hey, I notice you really, argue with people when they're wrong about a fact instead of just letting it go. Why is that? And most of us will say, I don't know, that's just the way I am. It really irks me when people are wrong. And it's really important that things are right. And I guess that's just who I am. And what we're going to do today is unpack that so that you can start to see not that this is who you are like a fixed object, but this is a way you learn to become because it served you in some way. And if you can start to see that, what that makes available is that if this is a way you became, you can also choose something different in the situations where that would best serve you. Not necessarily always, but in certain situations. And that gives us access to power as a leader. As a leader, once we can do that, we have more options available in any given moment because we are no longer operating just the way we are. We can now say, does that actually serve me? Like I might have a lean in that direction, but is there a different way that would serve me that's counter to my story about the way I am? So this can really start to open things up for you, can help you broaden how you show up and the options you have as a leader. And even more importantly, this can really support you in terms of how you work with other people, because you're going to start to see, oh, this isn't the way they are. This is how they've learned to be. And there's a reason behind the way that they're being this way in the moment. And then from there, you can actually support them to transform it. What typically happens in most leadership conversations that I'm party to is that people come to this conclusion, they do this thing, that's the way they are, they're just not a candidate for leadership, and then that's the end of the leadership conversation. And that's a disservice to the person we're developing as a leader, and it's a disservice to our own leadership. It's actually an abdication of our leadership. We are giving up. Giving up is often easier, but it's not really the path that we walk as leaders. So that's what's available for you down this video, this series today, part two. A quick reminder on ontology using a very simple example. When we're looking ontologically at something, we are looking not just at how someone shows up on the surface, but what is happening in the dimension of their being. So you think of like our actions, what we say and do as existing on like this two-dimensional plane. And as we start to develop the ability to work with, to see, to understand, to show up ontologically, we're adding a new dimension, the dimension of our being. So you could think of like instead of now a two-dimensional plane, we have a three-dimensional cube. And the easiest example for this is imagine someone that has a list of to-do items and they're stressed out because they have this list of to-do items, things that they haven't done that need to be done. And so what they do is they go into their life and they frantically, stressed out, harried, they try to cross all this stuff off their list so that then they can have the experience of feeling at peace. So it makes quite a lot of sense on the surface, right? You've got this list. That's the reason you feel stressed out. Get all that done, and then you can have peace. Makes total sense on the level of what they're doing. When we start to look at this ontologically, meaning we look at who they're being and how that's going, what we notice is that we have someone here who is being stressed out, frustrated, harried, frantic, in the hopes that by being that way, they eventually will be peaceful and at ease and relaxed. So it's a bit weird, right? It's like, oh, they're being stressed out, frantic, all of that stuff. And they're hoping that by being that long enough, they will eventually arrive here. And of course, we get like a short-term payoff. There's like this fleeting moment of peace, but we always get better at the way we're being. And so this person will become better and better and better at being stressed out, frantic, and harried, and getting this increasingly diminishing window of peace that provides. Instead of, ontologically, the solution here would be to look at like, without changing your circumstances, what might be available? How might we support you to be relaxed and at peace here, even in the midst of having stuff to cross off your list? So that, yeah, you're going to have to get stuff done anyhow, but who you're being as you do it will radically shift things. And if you can be at peace and calm and easy as you're crossing these things off your list, well, hey, guess what? You're not now trying to do a bunch of stuff to achieve a certain way of being. You're already being that. And when we are being relaxed, peaceful, etc., things go better. We tend to do better work. So that's the ontological lens. That's where we're looking today. Let's have a sip of coffee. Okay, excellent. I see that we have 0 viewers, so it's possible I may have set this up wrong. I'm going to do this anyhow. I don't care. Okay. So what we want to talk about today is basically the journey that a human moves through as they age, as they mature. And that's going to illustrate how we arrive at where we are. And the sort of, there's a quote I'm just in my mind thinking about when I'm going to drop it in here. I'll do it in a few moments. A Buckminster Fuller quote. So when we come onto this planet, when we are born, we are basically purely expressed. We haven't, when we're born, we don't have any stories about like what's appropriate or what's professional or what's acceptable or who to be afraid of or who to bully or, whatever that happens to be in our culture, in our country, in our lineage, our lineage of ancestors and like the way our parents were raised. None of that is input into us yet. And you've noticed this if you've been around children, like young children, babies, they're just fully expressed. They have no awareness that who they be is anything other than just what there is to be. And so this is like part of what makes children so delightful is they're like these very freely expressed little human beings. They haven't learned to contain themselves, to hold themselves in check, to like, oh, that's not okay. It's really, really delightful. And it's part of what's so annoying about the fact that airlines seem to have this habit of booking them directly behind me on flights. So we come onto this planet as like these beings, these fully expressed beings of light. We don't know that there's like a right way to be. And so we just express ourselves. And the easiest way to kind of to capture this concept is we would assert down this lineage of medicine, this ontological approach, that humans have a fundamental essence, an essential nature, something that makes me, Adam, unique and different from you. And even if you've spent time around twins who have the same genetic DNA, there is a different kind of essential quality to them, an essence, an ontology to them, their very being. And the easiest way to kind of grasp or get at or kind of distinguish someone's essential nature in my line of work, we use their qualities of being. So there's many, an infinite number of qualities of being. I'm just going to list some. So like brilliance, wisdom, connection, wit, play, divinity. Did I already say generosity? Contribution, leader, power, many more. We could just keep listing ways of being. We have access as humans to all ways of being, and we have certain strong suits. We have certain like particular qualities that are like kind of uniquely more present in us than other people. So people like me and myself, we have a lot of brilliance. That's, if you've checked out my profile on LinkedIn, you'll see like I put in my tagline says world-class coaching for the smartest person in the world, in the room. And that's not an arrogant statement. I'm speaking to those that have the quality of brilliance and might have a subjective experience of often feeling like, man, I'm kind of the smartest person here. Never mind what to do about that. It's an entirely different conversation we can come to. So brilliance, connection, all of these sort of things. And that's just our essential nature. I like to think of this stuff a lot like the way your hair parts, as an example. Just because my hair parts in this direction doesn't mean I don't have access to any particular haircut I want. But knowing the way my hair parts is going to make my life a little easier. I can kind of like groom the haircut in alignment with that or against it so I get more volume or, whatever the case happens to be. So our essential nature doesn't mean that I can't, if I'm connection, I can't also be generosity. I'm just going to be less compelled in that direction. This is part of why you'll notice certain people, like the things you admire in other people tend to be a reflection of you. And you might not, like for me, of course, I'm very committed to being generous and like a kind human, but that's not part of my essential nature. And so I'm not super inspired by someone like Mother Teresa because she's not such a direct reflection of me. But like Buckminster Fuller, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, people with a lot of brilliance, I'm like, I love listening to these people speak. So we come onto this planet, we've got this essential nature, and we're just expressing it. It's just free. The easiest way you can notice yourself catching this unconsciously probably is anytime you're around toddlers, you might notice yourself feeling or saying something like, wow, it's a weird thing to say, but this little dude is kind of like a wise old soul. Or like, wow, this kid, it's weird. I really feel them connect deeply with me. Or this little guy is super smart. Or that kid's hilarious. Like, so what's happening is you are getting the experience of being with them. You are getting the experience of their essence. This is ultimately a subjective experiential thing. So from there, we can take the next step. So we come on this planet where we're just our essence, that's just we're expressed as that. And then what shows up is fear. Our fear is just basically anytime we get any training that something is wrong. And that doesn't require very much at all. And as children, our job is to make everything about us. So I might cry as a child, and my mom might turn away from me. And that creates this experience in the moment where I'm like, ooh, something I'm doing is not okay. So it takes very little and it's inevitable. We can't avoid this step. It's not like we could raise our children in some way that this didn't happen. That's not available. This is an inevitable, natural part of our maturation. Sociologists call this socialization. So we learn from witnessing the way our parents, our teachers, our guardians, our friends, our peers, etc., be around us and how they respond to us. Our fear tends to be quite linear, and because we make it about ourselves, it tends to have two main flavors. One flavor is who I am is too much, and the other flavor is who I am is not enough. So, as an example, sorry, let me put in a little bit more here. That too much, not enough, it inadvertently or automatically gets kind of connected to our essential nature. So I'm going to draw this out so you can kind of see it. Let's say that now I'm maybe, I don't know, 5, and I go to school and I bring home a paper. I'm a 5-year-old writing papers, but you get the idea. I bring home a paper. I didn't have any requirements. I didn't need to do anything. I just bring it home. And there's my dog coming in to make appearance. I bring it home and I got an A minus. And I wasn't trying to do anything. I was just being myself expressed. And what happens is my parents, who are really committed to supporting me to have a good, strong work ethic, to do really well, to get the jobs that I want, to go to the universities that I'm going to want to do way down the line. They say, Adam, that's really great work, but um, where's the A plus? You're capable of more. You could do even better with just a little bit more studying. And so what I conclude in this moment is, oh, I guess my natural expression of self isn't enough. And so in those situations, what I learned to do unconsciously is to turn my brilliance up. I turn it up a little higher. We're talking about brilliance, but we could apply this anywhere easily. And then there's other situations where maybe a little while later I go to school and now I'm like really hammering it and I'm doing good and I'm getting great grades and I'm like proud of myself because I'm making my parents happy and I show my friends my grades and they make fun of me. They call me a nerd. They kick dirt in my eyes. I don't know, whatever mean things kids do. They cancel me on Instagram or whatever. They make me feel bad for getting that grade. They're just being playful. They're just doing whatever. It doesn't really matter their intention. What matters is the way it lands on me, the way it gets metabolized into my system is I'm too much. In this situation, my brilliance it's bad. It's not serving me. It actually makes me get made fun of. And so around these situations, I learned to do something different. I learned to turn my brilliance down. So we start with our essence, our fundamental way of being, fundamental ways of being. Then we have fear. And once that fear shows up, we now have a corresponding strategy that gets created. That's the turn yourself up in response or turn yourself down. So let's look at another quality of being, just to give an example. Let's look at someone whose quality, part of who they are, is generosity. So someone who brings the quality of generosity onto the table never shows up to a house party without a gift. Always, always, always wants to send a thank you note to follow up. And if they don't send that thank you note, they feel pretty bad. It's like existentially painful to them. Me, I'll show up, whatever. You got the gift of me. That's what I'm bringing to this party. It's not that I'm selfish. Of course, I'm going to be gracious and thank you for inviting me to your party and all of that stuff. But it's not quite the same thing for me because my fundamental qualities of being doesn't include generosity. It's just not quite the same. So someone who's generous, the thing that's going to really get them is like, let's imagine that they're showing up and for whatever reason, maybe their parents are having a tough day, but like they go to a party and at the end they're leaving and the parents say, hey, aren't you going to say thank you? And the person comes to this conclusion like, oh, I'm not generous enough. The spirit of generosity I already brought. None of this is conscious, right? But the conclusion that happens internally is that spirit of generosity is insufficient. And therefore they're left feeling like an absent of generosity, like they're selfish. And so what they learn to do is crank that generosity up in spades. They turn it up to 11, kind of like in Spinal Tap. So that gets them to this point now where around situations that have the same kind of energetic resonance, meaning like the people feel kind of the same way, the situation kind of feels similar, the way people are talking, the way people are looking, whatever that texture of that experience was, anytime they come into a future situation that has something similar to that, they now have a strategy. Be extra generous on top of being generous. And so what happens is they learn, no matter what, to always bring a thank you card and to leave it, and also to thank the host 3 times. And they can't leave until they thank the host 3 times. I'm just making up strategies, but the important thing here that you get is that what happens is our fear shows us these 2 situations. In some places we're too much, in other places we're not enough, and then we create a strategy. Okay? So now we're going to build on that. What happens is these strategies get created and they're not conscious at all. None of this is in our awareness. We're just going about our life, doing our best to be liked and loved. And we learn the way a child learns, which is we just do trial and error and something kind of like gets a good response. So then we do more of that. You do more of what is rewarded and less of what is punished. So if I show up really brilliant, look at my grades, and I get kind of punished by being made fun of for it, I'm going to do less of that. I'm going to turn myself down. And if I get rewarded by my parents in these situations, blah, 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 I'm going to do more of that. So over time, these strategies just become automatic. They become honed and what we would call perfected. And what that means is that they become less and less like something I'm choosing in the moment, and they become almost like a stimulus and a response pair that have become glued together. The stimulus shows up, boom, the response is right there. So as soon as the stimulus of like people looking like those friends that I had way back in grade 5, now I'm in high school, now I'm in university, now I'm at a networking event. As soon as I'm around someone that feels like that, there is an automatic response that goes along with it. And that response is turn myself down. Maybe pretend I'm a little dumber than I am. Maybe be a little quieter. Maybe not volunteer so much. Maybe not share facts that I know about this particular subject of conversation that we're in. Do whatever that happens to be. So what happens is that becomes honed. It becomes perfected, and I become very automatic in it, very unconscious. Unconsciousness is a very efficient process. The more something can become unconscious, the less we have to think about it, and the faster it can be kind of operated with, the faster it can be affected. And so when things become unconscious, it's a sign that they've been made very efficient. This is, that idea of unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then finally you get to unconscious competence, where you play a sport and you just naturally know what to do. Or you're riding a bike, you don't have to think about which way do I turn the handlebars. It's just automatically, it's built into you. So this stuff becomes built into us, and now it's using us rather than us using it. So we've now got these fears that were kind of built long ago. We've got the strategies that we've learned to make, and those strategies now exist as something automatic. They're not thought of. They're not anything we're aware of. We just have them go that way. Let's just try to close this door 1 second. the door closing stick for when the dog comes in. So now we've got these strategies, and what happens is they get used and used and used over the decades, our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, and they become more and more elaborate. So if in the early days I was learning how to like just kind of stay more and more quiet, as time goes on, not only do I learn how to stay more and more quiet, I also learn how to withdraw from the sort of people I don't like. And I might also learn how to like really feel good about the time that I don't spend around the people that I find kind of challenging to be with, because I get to work on my projects. So I kind of become empowered by these strategies. And these strategies are not bad. So it's a good thing to be empowered by them. But what is happening is that we become, in our 20s, 30s, we become kind of more aware of the payoff, the good parts about them. And what's going on is a little bit like a river rushing across a rock. The river erodes that rock, and then the rock kind of that's becoming eroded shapes the path of the river. And so we kind of like settle in with our strategies and start to like become more both guided by them, but also guide ourselves naturally into them and reinforce them. So it becomes a self-reinforcing pattern. What happens here is that as life goes on, we start to fail to see these as anything other than the way we are, right? So this is where we start to reach that conclusion. We're unaware of this, but we start to become present to its impact in our life. So I just start to find like, oh, I'm just the sort of person that like loves to study. And I'm just sort of the person that like reads vociferously about any particular subject that interests me. And I'm just kind of the kind of person that when someone is saying something and they've got it wrong, I really can't let that sit. I really have to like run across the room and argue with them, interrupt their dinner date and argue with them and explain to them how they're incorrect. And that just becomes sort of the way I relate to myself. That's the way I am. And in addition to that, I naturally find myself into careers, relationships, situations that reward and like are a good fit for that kind of behavior. So let's look at me as an example here. I bring the quality of brilliance. Many of you may also share that quality with me. And what I learned growing up is that in certain situations, I became afraid that I'm not enough. What is not enough brilliance? I'm stupid. I did not like that fear. None of us do. We don't like the feeling of not being enough of too much. We hate it. It's very bad. And you know, evolutionarily speaking, when we weren't accepted as who we are historically, man, we were kicked out onto the Serengeti with our loincloth and nothing else, no protection of the tribe, and then we died. So social acceptance is incredibly important for us humans. And it's deep, deep, deep into the fabric of of ourselves. So I'm stupid, don't like that. I had to do stuff, learn how to avoid that. And so I would do things like study, read books, read all the time. I already like reading, but I'm going to read now 7 times more. Even though I may be dumb or done, even though I might be done with the subject, I'm going to read 3 times more just to make sure. I learned how to argue really, really effectively. I really learned how to prove that I was right about something, because if I was right, that meant I wasn't dumb and you were the dumb one. I was the smart one. So all of these became like the patterned ways I learned to be. And naturally, where do you think I found myself in one of my careers? The practice of law. It was a perfect fit to step into law from these strategies, right? Read constantly, read way more than I'm comfortable with. Even when I feel like I've got the answer, read another 6 times. Be highly perfectionistic so I can make sure that everything I have to say is watertight, airtight even. There's no loophole. If I feel like you are kind of like maybe smarter than me, condescend, belittle you intellectually so that I can bring you down. So maybe I'm not the smartest, but at least you're less smart than me. And therefore I get to kind of not have to be with this excruciating feeling of maybe being dumb and therefore kind of negating myself. So these strategies become perfect fits and we end up in these careers that kind of reward and reinforce those strategies. Okay. And then where that leaves us is with this conclusion, we look around us in the world that we've shaped around ourselves and that's been a natural fit for us. And we conclude, well, this isn't me. Like I'm good here, but I'm this way because I have to be, because my career demands it. So if you talk to lawyers, you know, they'll say stuff like, well, look, I would love to not have to work 70 hours a week or, you know, whatever it happens to be for them. But you don't understand. This career requires it. That's just the way I have to be. And the actual deeper truth is, well, yeah, but you found a career that met you in the way you were already reliable. And so it creates this very compelling reason why it's not me. The thing over there external to myself needs to shift. And until that happens, nothing can change. But the truth is, actually, the source of this is internal. And until you address that, nothing will change and nothing can change. This is also, by the way, why a lot of people will leave like a high powered career. You know, maybe they're like a lawyer or something, and they'll be like, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And then they go become an entrepreneur and they recreate the exact same experience of work that they did over here. Exactly the same, because the issue wasn't actually the career, it wasn't their circumstances. It was them and who they were being. And so this is where that Zen saying, wherever you go, there you are, comes from. We can run away from our circumstances and it looks like it's going to change things. And of course, anytime you do anything new, novel, it'll be different for a little bit. But very quickly, you'll find yourself in the exact same situation because this work lies within, because this is an ontological issue rather than a phenomenological issue. Phenomenological meaning the circumstances of your life, as opposed to who you're being in and about your life. Let's have a sip here, take a pause. That's good coffee. So we arrive at this point. And often when I start to distinguish this with people, they have a bit of a objection. And the objection is, well, hang on, this isn't bad. I like the fact that I read a lot of books, or I like the fact that I'm good at arguing. It really serves me in a lot of situations. Or I like the fact that I'm really generous and that I go and tell people that, and that I really make sure that they feel welcome. I agree. All of these strategies are beautiful. None of them are wrong or bad. Typically, I'm not the one putting wrong or bad in, other people are. The problem is not that these strategies exist, it is that they are automatic. This is where the problem lies. They are automatic because, one, we are unaware of them. They exist below the surface of our consciousness, like the 90% of the iceberg that's below the water. We can't see it. And because it's unconscious, because we cannot consciously distinguish, see, know about them, we are powerless over them, and they are powered, they have power over us. Again, they use us rather than us using them. We don't choose these strategies. The moment I end up around someone that's like a threat to my intellect, that makes me feel like those kids did or my parents did long, long, long ago, boom, I don't have any choice. I'm going to be studying 6 times harder than I would normally. And this is why those of you that like find yourself frustrated because you over prepare, or maybe struggle with something like imposter syndrome, what's actually happening is one of your buttons is getting triggered and you're kicking into a strategy to try to alleviate that. That's where this is the problem. And so it's not wrong that these things exist. You don't have to eradicate these things. What we seek to do in this kind of transformational work is, one, help you become conscious to these things. Start to bring them up out of the water of your unconsciousness so you can hold them and look at them and decide, is this thing in this moment really what's going to serve me long term? Is this supporting the breakthrough that I want to create for myself? Does this support the transformation I'm committed to? As a leader, is this way of being in this moment what will best serve this group? So it's not bad that these exist. It's simply problematic that they are automatic. Problematicity is in the automaticity. That sounds like a cool quote. So this is what we are up against, is this sort of state. And what happens is that because of the way this gets created, because of how it's unconscious, because of how even our careers ultimately end up feeling like, not feeling, they ultimately end up reinforcing this and kind of provide us these clues that this is something outside of us. It's just the way life is, as opposed to the way I became. We arrive at this place of resignation. What we are left is present to the impact of these in our life, but unaware that we are the cause of that impact. So we see like, I'm just the sort of person that doesn't have a lot of deep friendships. I'm just the sort of person that tends to have like a lot of acquaintances, but not really that many deep relationships. And what we do is we learn how to be okay with that. So let's just unpack that piece so you can have that as an example too. Part of who I am, in addition to brilliance, is connection. So I'm the kind of person that you put me in a room, I'm like social lubricant. That room is already going to start talking more. Everyone's going to know each other a little bit better. Not just that I connect deeply with people, energetically, I cause connection just by virtue of being there. And if you've ever been around someone or like this, or you know yourself to be like this, you know what I'm talking about. Sort of like, oh, we got to get that person to the party. They're going to really liven it up. Or, oh, I'm stoked that they came. They're kind of like lifing up the party. So that's part of my essence. But I learned growing up that that part of me, like the desire to connect deeply with people, could be a little too intense. Or sometimes I'd open up and connect with someone and they'd kick me, they'd hurt me, they'd reject me on some level because I all open, super intimate, and then boom, they didn't like that. I'd feel some kind of closure, even if it was just like an energetic, an internal heart-based closure. And then I would be devastated, I'd be crushed, and I would conclude, oh, the state of connection I naturally bring, it's too much. People aren't interested in that. And so I'd withdraw from it. So I learned how to pull away from that. First, I would do it just in conversation. So I'd talk to you, but I would learn how to keep my heart kind of protected. And I would also learn how to avoid things physically. Like literally, I would just not go to parties, even though I wanted to be at parties, even though I wanted to be surrounded by people, even though I love and get life from being connected with people. Instead, what was safer for me was to stay home and to entertain myself, have hobbies like these Magic the Gathering cards over here, or play computer games, or do whatever, watch TV with my wife, whatever it happens to be, withdraw. And how that left me was that I tended to protect myself from the kind of relationships I really wished I had, deep, meaningful relationships. And instead, I ended up with a lot of acquaintances because I was very natural at chatting. I could network, I could be very glib, but I did it all with a closed, protected heart. So people would get to kind of enjoy me, but they wouldn't really get an experience of who I was. Sounds like my dog is really snoring, coming through on that mic. Turn that snoring down, buddy. And so where I ended up in my early 30s was with this conclusion, which was like, I guess I'm just that way. I guess I'm just the sort of person that doesn't really create a lot of deep relationships. I love the ones that I have. I'm so glad I've got those. Those are my deep friends. And I got a bunch of acquaintances, and that's how it is for me. And I just need to learn to be okay with that. And that is the sound of resignation. I just need to learn to be okay with that. I just need to be happy. I just need to accept that. That is our resignation. That is concluding, because we're unable to see that we are the creators of this, that this is just the way it's going to go. And in truth, until we can start to pull this stuff out of the water to look at it, that is what is available. We can only kind of feel the impact of this, and we conclude it's just the way we are and just the way life is for us. It doesn't have to be, but that's our conclusion. By the way, as I started to get like really supported deeply in this line of work and really like take on my own transformation, I started to see how I created all that. And I started to step across the threshold of my own fear. It was scary to open my heart back up to really connect with people because it meant they could reject me once again. But as I started to do that, relationships started to become more plentiful. And these days, much to my surprise, like if I told 30-year-old Adam this, he'd be shocked out of his mind. I find that I have like a lot of deep relationships, and most of the people I connect very intimately. I don't have a lot of acquaintances anymore. I tend to create deep relationship everywhere I go, and I tend to have a lot of those. That's available through this kind of work. So we conclude this is the way it's going to be, and then we resign ourselves to it. And once we reach that point of resignation, everything that happens from there forward is a reinforcement of our stuckness, so to speak. So I say, I guess I just need to be okay being the sort of person that just has a lot of acquaintances and doesn't create deep friendships. And then what I do is I learn how to stop listening to the part of myself that's like, but I want to know people more deeply. That voice just naturally gets quieter and quieter. And I start to find ways to empower what I've resigned myself to. So I find ways like, you know what? I'm actually quite content not having like a lot of deep friendships. It leaves me more time to work on my projects. It leaves me more time to focus on my family, right? So I empower this state that I've now resigned myself to, rather than, really exploring possibility, which might be like, well, what I'd really like is deep relationships and the ability to really focus on my projects rather than the one or the other. That possibility no longer exists because we've concluded that we are just the way we are. So when we work with this, First of all, as a leader, when you start to take this on, what's going to happen is you are going to start to see yourself with far more nuance. You start to become aware, not just of like kind of like your foibles or the things you wish you could change, but you also start to understand how they got here, and you start to see that some of the stuff you've concluded is just locked in is actually all a choice. And anytime we have like a way of being as a leader that we conclude is just how we are, that is an inherent limitation on our leadership. The most impactful leader, like ultimately, leadership is about having impact, not forceful impact. I mean, impact like the capacity to create something in the world. And in order to be as impactful as possible, to maximally be impactful, we have to have access to all ways of being, because some situations are going to require a particular way of being. And if I have a story that that's just not how I am, that is no longer accessible to me. That cannot exist in my option set. And consequently, my leadership is hemmed. It's kind of hedged in by the conclusions I make. And so what you see is a lot of people when they're kind of like talking about their development in leadership, or maybe boasting or just sort of trying to acknowledge themselves, what they're actually doing is they're acknowledging the range that they are already reliable in. And they just get better and better and better inside this existing range, which is totally fine. But that's not really where leadership lies. Leadership lies when we broaden our range. We push beyond the limitations of the stories that we have about ourselves. And so all of these versions of like, this is just the way I am, are actually limitations on your leadership. And more positively speaking, they are also like the gates through which your leadership can exponentially grow. Because right now you're really good in this one range, but if you can break through those walls, oh my goodness, you suddenly have like so much more available. So this is like kind of the difference between learning how to run faster on a two-dimensional plane and learning how to operate on a third dimension. Suddenly you have so much more accessibility, so much more range. It's great to get a car that can drive faster and faster and faster. But what about if you could also travel through the air? It's going to open up a vast amount of more efficient opportunities and access to places that currently weren't available or previously weren't available, and all of that sort of stuff. So this is what becomes available down this path. This is what's available for you as a leader. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk now about how this also benefits you developing other people's leadership. And then we're going to talk about some ways you can practice with this and finish up. We'll have some coffee first. Doing all right down there, Grimby? He seems just fine. So one, if you can start to see this in yourself, then it's going to open up your options in terms of how you can be in any given situation. Perhaps as a leader, there might be a situation where you proving something as right or wrong actually won't serve the moment that well. Great. Now you have access to that. Instead of just being the way you are, you can do something different. Let's look at other people. So most of us that have led in any capacity have heard or worked with these sort of people where they're described as like brilliant technicians, arrogant, can't work with other people. And so we conclude that's who they are. That's like, we see them as a fixed object and we try to like push them out of it, but it doesn't work. And then we conclude, there's no opportunity there. They're not a candidate for leadership, blah, 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 the end. Through this approach, this way of seeing people, this way of like starting to ontologically pull apart what's happening so we can see a much deeper picture, we can start to see what's actually going on for these people and we can relate to them a bit differently. So what we as humans do is we're quick to jump to labeling, because labeling allows us to like alleviate our discomfort, alleviate our dissonance. It's sort of like, that's that. And now I don't have to think about it anymore because I've concluded it's that. You are this way, end of. That is a disservice in terms of leadership. It eliminates, it solves the problem of our discomfort, but it eliminates the possibility of anything beyond that. It makes your leadership ultimately unconsciously about you and your discomfort rather than about the greater picture. So when we have someone that's arrogant like this, we can start to look at it ontologically and we can get curious about how they ended up here. So we can start to ask questions like, what is the way of being that would either be turned all the way up to arrogance or turned all the way down to arrogance? And, you could imagine, well, what would brilliance look like as an example if we turned that all the way up? Probably pretty arrogant. I even described as a lawyer, I was like very condescending. God forbid you ever got into an argument with me. Oy, oy, oy. And so when our brilliance looks like feeling not enough, we turn it up, remember? And we can become very arrogant, very righteous, very like, you're an idiot for challenging this or even asking that question. And that's how we are. That's how we conclude the way I am. And so already we have access to like a new layer of seeing for this person. Instead of seeing someone who is arrogant, now we can see someone who is brilliant and is scared of not being enough and has learned to get arrogant to alleviate that fear. That already provides new opportunities. Before, when you have someone who's arrogant and that's the end of the story, what are your choices? Well, you can reprimand them. You can tell them, hey, you're kind of arrogant, stop it. You can manage around them, like, okay, they'll deal with me, but no one else, kind of reroute everyone around them on the org chart. But once we can start to see, oh, brilliant, but afraid and showing up as arrogant, we can start to address the fear. We can start to like very cautiously, this requires some art and some training. But the point being, we can start to like relate to them more as the wholeness of who they are, as opposed to just the thing showing up on the surface. This is kind of akin to if I have this flesh wound that keeps showing up on my arm and I keep putting band-aids on it, because what else are you going to do, right? I want this flesh wound to heal, and it doesn't seem to shift it. But if I can start to understand that what's going on is I have a case of flesh-eating bacteria, well, now I can treat that at that level. And I might still need to put a band-aid on that flesh wound, but at least now I'm addressing the wholeness. I'm addressing this entirely for all of what it is, and that allows things to actually shift. Likewise, if I see an iceberg in the water and I want to move it, it's really helpful if I can see the entirety of the iceberg. That's going to help me understand how best to use physics to move this thing, this entity through the water. Otherwise, I just get my best ships or whatever, and I push at that top part of the iceberg, and for some reason, it just doesn't move. I don't understand what's going on. So this is what this ontological layer allows us to do. As you start to see people at this level, you start to gain access to new options. This will require on your part a bit of like discomfort, like going to the gym and lifting weights. It's unpleasant. And especially when you're first starting out, you shake a bunch and you feel like an idiot. You want to quit. You want to be looking like that guy over there who's really ripped, or that woman who looks great and like lifting 50-pound weights. You want to do that, but you can't. That's not where you are. So we have to be willing to slow down and to sit in our discomfort. We have to be willing as leaders to go and sit in the ontological gym. And the starting point for that is noticing when we feel like the impact of someone's survival mechanism, their strategy, and just sitting with it and getting curious, opening our hearts back up and being like, what kind of way of being would show up like this when it's scared? So that's part of how this lens really supports leaders, and it allows people to start to work with people much more powerfully, like with an entire new access to an entire new dimension, which radically changes how things go. So it's like you're going from a leader who just drives fast cars, faster and faster, to a leader who now has access to planes and submarines and cars and bikes, all of that stuff. So some of the things you can do. Just looking to see if I have my book. The first thing you can do is you can read my book. My book's called Who Do You Think You Are? And it's really all this. It lays out this model, and most germane to this conversation, it lays out 25 different qualities of being. And it also helps you see the two different kind of what we call survival mechanisms or strategies that those qualities of being kind of fork out to. So for brilliance, there's kind of condescending and arrogant. And the flip side to that is dense and kind of dumb. For generous, it's sort of like people tend to become like a doormat. They just give and give and give, almost like a martyr. And then the flip side is selfish. And the irony of this is that whatever our essential natures, one of the ways we show up when we are afraid is the opposite. So for example, if you have someone who is commitment, one of the ways they're going to show up when they're afraid is very flaky. And then what we conclude, because we have none of this training, this ability to see, we conclude, oh, well, this is just a flaky person. So what they need me to do is micromanage them. Well, guess what happens when someone who is commitment is feeling afraid that they're not being committed enough, and then has someone show up and start micromanage them even more? They get even more afraid, right? They're even, oh my God, I'm not. And then they double down on their commitment so that now they're overcommitted. They start to drop balls. Oh my God, nothing's really changing. This is why most leadership actually is like, it's like the iceberg in the water. It tends to just push things back and forth, or like a pendulum. You move people to one pole and then you move them back to the best pole, the other pole, and you kind of just have to conclude, I guess this side's better than that side. but actually there's no transformation. There's just sort of a choice between two not particularly great results. When we approach things ontologically, we can break through that and we can create the breakthrough. So one, my book is a really great resource because it helps you kind of distinguish and learn how to see this stuff, but then also how to trace from the thing showing up on the surface down into like, what's the essential nature of this person? And the more you get supported to do that, the more you start to just do it inevitably, naturally. And what's really cool about that is you start to go into your life, into your world, and you just become someone who tends to see the essence underneath the way people are showing up, which allows you more compassion and makes life feel more fun. You feel less frustrated by people and their stupidity because people can be stupid, this guy included, all of that stuff. So life becomes a little richer and you start to have a lot more compassion for yourself throughout all this. So this book is a great example, or a great practice. Another practice that can really serve you is to get clear, like just be in the practice of noticing the conclusions you've made about the way you are. So get curious about those. See if you can catch yourself saying it. See where you've resigned to just being a particular way. And for bonus points, bring this kind of inquiry to it. Like, okay, well, what might have been the payoff of that? What might that provide me? Like if I'm always right, what's the nice thing about that? What don't I have to confront? How does that keep me safe? And what a lot of people do is they sit with that question and then they go, I don't know. And then they conclude their inquiry. So the third thing to practice is to notice that I don't know and not stop there. I don't know is a beautiful place to get because it's an indication that you're on the threshold of something new. If you already knew, well, then we wouldn't be really looking down this path because there'd be nothing new here. Once you get to I don't know, you have to take a courageous step. You got to take some guesses. You got to take some swings. Okay, I don't know, but maybe it could be, or it might be, blah, 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 blah. That's how you deepen into this. We want you looking in the areas where you don't know. We just don't want you to stop there. Keep going once that comes up. So that's a really beautiful practice too. And finally, really, really valuable for those of you that lead is to take a look at the people that you've concluded are not candidates for leadership and look through this lens. What is it about them? What is it about the way they show up that has you concluding they're not a candidate for leadership? And then just set that aside for a moment and take that way of being and put it into this kind of inquiry I'm describing. Really, really helpful because it's going to, if nothing else, you don't have to choose to allow them to lead, but you're going to start to deepen your ability to see people. And that's what allows you to create transformation as a leader. The more awareness you have, the more altitude you have, the more you can see the forest for the trees, the more powerful you are as a leader. Okay, let's take a final sip here. I must have I must have posted this the wrong way. I'm gonna see what I did wrong because I don't think we had a single viewer today. Last week we had about 9, so that's okay. This is recorded, so this will go on the podcast. I'll put this out on YouTube. I might repost this on LinkedIn. We'll see. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to speak to. Oh yeah, the last thing I want to share is the way you relate to someone is determinative, and this is what we're going to talk about next week. So your how you think about someone, the story you have about someone, how you relate to them is completely determinative of what is available to you, what is available to them, your ability to lead them. All of that is dictated by how you relate to them. And so what we're doing here is we're starting to unpack what's showing up so you can relate to them a little more deeply. So you can have a greater understanding of them, which then allows much more leadership. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. We're going to talk about the way and how you relate to someone and how that's determinative of what's available. Coming along after that, we're going to talk about what it means to develop leadership. Like, what is the development of leadership? How does that work? We'll probably distinguish leadership from coaching there. We'll talk in a future episode about how leadership is ultimately about relationship and intimacy, and I'll explain that and help you see how to work with that. And then we're going to start to introduce some really key concepts to this, like the notion of a context and how you work with that and how that supports you. So that's everything we've got coming. Hope you enjoyed the show this week, if you tuned in. And if not, well, I hope you enjoyed watching this after the fact. And we'll catch you next week, Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on LinkedIn. Bye, everyone.